Hello everybody, happy Monday. I'm coming to you on another digital lecture to help you get through this section on carbon containing compounds. And this picture here is showing you the structure of a molecule, and each of the large round spheres represents a different element, and then the bars in between the spheres represent the chemical bonds, and which is the sharing of electrons. And so that's what we're going to be talking about, is how compounds are made. Remember, a compound is when you have more than one atom combine and chemically bond, and compounds that we have in our bodies that contain carbon. So first of all, what I've done here is I've got the most important stuff that you want to write down identified in red. You definitely want to write down the heading, what the chemistry of carbon and how that is significant, because everything we're going to be talking about now in this section has to do with carbon. So we're going to be discussing what's called organic chemistry, and organic just means the chemistry of carbon. This is not the same thing as when we see organic at the grocery store, which means natural. Okay, so organic does not mean, for our purposes, natural. Okay, get that out of your head. Organic here means that these compounds, these molecules contain carbon. Okay, carbon, carbon, carbon. It's all about carbon. Why is carbon so unique and amazing? Because in the structure of a carbon atom, it has 4 electrons in its outermost shell. And so, how many, if you remember from our last section, how many electrons in the does a element want to have in its outermost shell? It wants to have 8. So if it's got 4, it just needs 4 more. So because it already has 4, it's going to look for relationships where it can share electrons, share those electrons. And when we share, we make covalent bonds. And these are going to be very, very strong covalent bonds. So carbon can bond with other carbon atoms and form chains. They can form rings, and they can form branching structures. So carbon atoms can connect to each other like this in a ring structure, or they can make branching patterns. And when they make branching patterns, it'd be like a carbon connected to a carbon, connected to a carbon, connected to a carbon, like that. And it branches. So a huge number of different types of shapes and arrangements, because carbon has those 4 electron. So remember, it wants to have 8 in its outermost shell. It has 4, needs 4 more. So it's going to make covalent bonds. Oh, that's a mess after I get done writing all over it. Sorry about that. We'll make the writing go away. Okay? If you need to, pause the video at this point to get caught up with the writing. Okay? I can't make the writing come back, I don't think. Nope. But hopefully you can always stop the video and rewind it back a little bit if you need to see my writing all over again. So, all living organisms are made up of molecules. Remember, molecules are 2 or more atoms with a covalent bond. Okay, connected together with covalent bonds. And if we're going to consider it organic, it has to contain carbon. Okay, so carbon is amazing and important in the human body because of the millions of different types of structures it can make. Again, if I went too fast for you, pause the slide until you're ready to go on to the next. But is it necessary to write down everything? Nope. So, next term here, macromolecule. So let's break this down. Macro and molecule. What does macro mean? Macro means large. And we've already established what a molecule is: a group of elements chemically bonded together with a covalent bond. So macromolecules are going to be very, very large molecules, and they're formed by this process called polymerization. So let's look at polymerization, what that means. Poly means many, and mer means parts. And anytime you see T-I-O-N on the end of a word, that means process of. So the word polymerization means literally the process of putting many parts together. So a macromolecule is made up of smaller parts called monomers that get polymerized. They get stuck together to make polymers. What does mono mean? One. So monomer means one part. So you take one part and connect it to another single part, connect it to another single part, connect it to another single part. And so each one of these represents the monomer. And this whole thing is called the polymer, many parts. And the process of what I just showed you there of connecting the single parts together is the process of polymerization. Okay, here's another nicer, prettier picture. This reminds me of Lego blocks. And if you are building a Lego tower, and I mean almost everybody has played with Legos at least once in their life or some other type of building block. Even if you're playing the game Jenga, when you take individual pieces, each individual piece represents a building block, a individual molecule, an individual Lego block. And when you connect them together, you make a polymer. So if you have a huge set of Legos and you want to build a certain type of castle or tower or bridge or car, you could take the same Lego blocks and use them to create lots of different structures. But do you have to keep this tower forever and ever once you build it? The answer is no. You can disassemble it into its individual parts and take those individual pieces and build something new. So what does this have to do with organic chemistry in our bodies? Well, when we eat a meal, what we're basically doing is taking in a complicated structure, organic molecules, breaking them down, and building something new with them. And that's what our metabolism does. There are 4 groups or categories of organic compounds that are found in living things, and we're going to discuss each one of these separately. What you need to remember about each one of these is that since we're saying they are organic, what element do they absolutely have to contain? And everybody hopefully should be having one word in their head right now. If they are organic, they contain carbon. That's what organic means for the purposes of our unit here. So, talk a little bit about nutrition real quick. When we eat food, what should we be eating? Well, the basis of our diet should be these carbohydrates. Now, not all carbohydrates are created equal. Some of them are better than others, okay? We should minimize pastas and breads and crackers. We should minimize that. And we should look for whole grains. Those are actually better for us. Then we have built on that our fruits and our vegetables, then our dairy and our meats, and then fats and oils very sparingly. So it's in a pyramid to show you proportionately how much you should kind of be trying to eat. And this changes a little bit over time. But the problem is that most of us tend to eat this a lot and this a lot. And we miss out on that. So think about what you eat for lunch or what you ate or maybe didn't eat for breakfast today. And, if your lunch consists of chips and a Gatorade, where are you eating at on the periodic table? You're not getting any protein. You're not getting your vitamins. You're getting a bunch of sugar, carbohydrates, okay? And fats and oils from the chips. So we'll talk more about nutrition and stuff later. Sometimes it's easier to eat poorly, and that's why we eat not so well. But it catches up with you. So a plate, the healthy eating plate, how to eat in a healthy way, is you look at how this is proportioned. Drinking water, tea, or coffee. Limit the amount of dairy you eat. Eat a variety of whole grains and healthy proteins that don't have a lot of fat. Look at how many vegetables on your plate you should have, and fruits. The more colorful your plate is, the healthier it is for you. So let's talk about our first category. So you should be writing down the heading, carbohydrates. And underneath that heading, in your notes, indent a little bit, and write down what carbohydrates contain: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. If you can remember what the symbols are for these, you can abbreviate C, H, and O. Okay, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Now, the important thing you can write right underneath it is that carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen is found in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio in these molecules. So if I went here and I counted up how many carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens, I would always have twice as many hydrogens as I do carbons and oxygens. Okay, so these are, and this is a typo here, there's no A in that. These are all monosaccharides, building blocks, simple sugars of what we make all of our complex carbohydrates from in our bodies. So what is the function of a carbohydrate? Why do we need to get them in our diet? Why do we eat them? And what does our body use them for? So this is a great question to put in over on your left hand in your margin where you write your questions on your Cornell notes. So carbohydrates are our main source of energy, and they have a structural purpose. Plants use carbohydrates for their cell walls outside of their cell membranes for structure so that the stem can stand up. And animals, insects, will use carbohydrates for their strong exoskeletons. Again, you're going to be writing down the stuff that's in red. So when we take a sugar and break it down, okay, the breakdown of sugars, such as glucose. Glucose is a sugar. This gives our body an immediate energy source. So that is our main primary use. Okay, our main use of carbs is energy. Okay, and when we take in a lot of carbohydrates, more carbohydrates than we're going to use right away, we're going to store those extra carbohydrates as starches. And we call these complex carbs. Okay? So if we eat something with a lot of glucose molecules in it, we're going to use some of that energy right away. And then whatever we don't use, we're going to store as a starch in our body as a complex carbohydrate. So here we have a structure of a starch molecule and showing you that each one of these rings here, if you break it down, that's what its actual structure looks like. And if we count, let's count how many carbons we have here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So C6. How many hydrogens? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12. See the little 2 there? That means there's 2. And how many oxygens? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the molecular formula for glucose. And glucose is the building block structure for all monosaccharides. Okay, we'll talk about monosaccharides and polysaccharides in a second. Just remember that formula, C6H12O6. It's going to be real important. So, simple sugars, single sugars are called monosaccharides. Mono means one, and saccharide means sugar. So a monosaccharide is one sugar. Examples of monosaccharides: glucose, galactose, and fructose. What do all these words have in common? Glucose, galactose, and fructose. They all have this OSE ending. When you see that OSE ending, you're going to recognize that it's a sugar. If we take all of these monosaccharides and stick them together, we're going to make a polysaccharide. And do you remember from a few slides before what poly means? Poly means many. So a polysaccharide is made from several monosaccharides together. So monosaccharide plus monosaccharide plus monosaccharide equals polysaccharide. Okay? If we just take two monosaccharides and stick them together, you want to guess what we call that? A disaccharide. Di means two. Here are some examples of polysaccharides. Okay, a starch is found in plants, like when you eat a potato, okay, or any root vegetable. It's going to have a lot of starch in it. So when the plant does photosynthesis, it takes sugar that it's mixing in its leaves and it stores it in starches in its roots. So this is a structural drawing of what a starch molecule looks like. And each one of these things is a monosaccharide, a simple glucose molecule. So monosaccharide plus monosaccharide plus monosaccharide makes a polysaccharide. Cellulose, also made by plants, is what they use in their cell walls. And notice, it's still the same subunits of glucose molecules, but every other one is turned upside down, so it has a slightly different structure. So that's what makes starch different from cellulose. Glycogen is the starch that we make in our bodies. We don't make starch the way a plant does. Notice the structure is different. It has a branching structure. And we store this in our liver. So when we take in a meal that's got a lot of carbohydrates in it and got a lot of glucose in it, whatever we don't use right away, we're going to turn into glycogen molecules and we're going to store it in our liver. And so when they say you have a fatty liver, that's because you've been eating too much. Lipids. Lipids, this is our second category. So you want to draw a line in your notes, and maybe you could, I'm sorry, I went too far. You could do like a Roman numeral 2. Oh my gosh, I'm having problems here. Sorry. Oh, I know what I'm doing. I forgot to tell my thing I wanted to write. There we go. So you could use like a Roman numeral 2, something like that. Lipids. Lipids. These are not soluble in water. Remember, oil and water don't mix. And they're made mostly from carbon and hydrogen. And these are going to be our fats, oils, and waxes. Okay. Fats, oils, and waxes are going to be the ones that you're going to be most familiar with. Steroids, these are often hormones. And these control activities throughout the body. So estrogen and testosterone, those are hormones, okay? And then phospholipids, this is an important part of our cell membranes. So all three of these things, fats, oils, waxes, steroids, and phospholipids are all the different categories of lipids. What's the function of a lipid? So again, this is a good question, a key question, a key thing that you should know what job lipids do. So put that over in your left-hand column. And again, if you need a second to get caught up, pause the video. Lipids are used to store energy. So, unlike a carbohydrate, which gets used up as an energy source right away, lipids are used to store energy. They make up biological membranes, which means the cell membrane, and waterproof coverings like wax on a bird's feathers, or oils. An animal will make there are frogs that secrete a lipid and they wipe it all over their bodies to help them to not dry out when they're out of water. Plants will use waxes on the cuticle of their leaves, the outer layer of their leaves, So these are all examples of lipids and their uses, their functions in the body. The monomers, the subunits of lipids, okay, a glycerol molecule and fatty acids. Okay, we're going to keep it in this general term, glycerol plus fatty acids. And we will distinguish between a saturated fat and an unsaturated fat, okay? So if a fat is saturated, then you have the maximum possible number of hydrogen atoms on it. It's saturated with hydrogen. It's full of hydrogen. Whereas an unsaturated fat doesn't have, it's not completely saturated. See, it doesn't have these two hydrogens down here. It's got a double bond, okay? So saturated versus unsaturated. I know you guys have all heard of these. Well, what's good for you? What's not good for you? Okay, so unsaturated fats. Those are the ones with the smiley face. Saturated fats, some of them are okay, and some of them you want to be careful of how much you eat, okay? So we have monounsaturated fats like olive oil, canola oil, peanut oil, and then polyunsaturated fats like omega-3s and omega-6s that you get from eating fish and things like that, nuts. Saturated fats, butter and coconut oil is okay. Coconut oil, palm oils, those are okay. But your meats, you want to be careful how much fat you get from meat, okay? Meat also contains protein, so we do need to eat it, but you just got to be careful for proportions. All right, so here is just a another chart. Margarine, stay away from it. It's better to eat real butter. Okay, so if you have a double bond, you have an unsaturated fat. And if you have a bunch of double bonds, it's a polyunsaturated fat, many unsaturated carbons. A good key to ask yourself, is this a saturated fat or an unsaturated fat? If it's an unsaturated fat, it's going to be liquid at room temperature, and that is good. Okay? Liquid at room temperature. Think about a cube of butter. You have to keep it in the refrigerator to keep it solid. As soon as you take it out of the refrigerator, it gets really, really soft. And if it gets too warm in the room, it'll even just melt. Whereas margarine, your tub of margarine, yeah, it'll soften up, but it will stay solid. So that is a saturated fat. Nucleic acids, this is group number 3, okay, or Roman numeral 3 if you know your Roman numerals. Nucleic acids, again, these are macromolecules. They contain hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus. So for writing symbols, we've got carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And the building blocks of these nucleic acids, our monomers, are known as nucleotides. So what is a nucleic acid? Okay, a nucleic acid is going to be our DNA molecules or our RNA molecules. And all DNA and RNA molecules are built up of individual nucleotides, which contain 3 things: a sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. We are not going to talk a lot about nucleic acids right now because we have a whole unit dedicated to DNA and how we make DNA and why DNA is important. I just need you right now to know that nucleic acids are DNA and RNA, and that nucleic acids are built from individual units, monomers of nucleotides. The nucleotide is the monomer, and each monomer is made up of a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. This is a drawing of a, what is this? Well, maybe I should ask you, what is this? This is a nucleotide. When we connect a bunch of these together, we make a nucleic acid. Okay. So here we have this is more detail that I need to get into with you guys right now. Just know that these are two different types of nucleotides and they combine in specific ways. Here's another key idea. What's the function of nucleic acids? Well, what is a nucleic acid? DNA and RNA. What's the purpose of our DNA? What's the purpose of our RNA? Super important. Store and transmit hereditary or genetic information. And just know that DNA and RNA are the two types of nucleic acids. So inside of the cell, inside of the nucleus of every single cell in your body, you have DNA and RNA. And DNA is like the blueprint of life. And if you're not sure what a blueprint is, it's like a master drawing that tells, that an architect would make, that tells the builder exactly how to build the building and where everything goes. All the details down to where electrical cables run, sewer lines, everything is on that blueprint. And that's what your DNA is. It is the blueprint of life. Proteins. This is category 4. Okay, and this is how we write 4 in Roman numerals. The V is a 5, and you put a 1 in front of it to make 4. Okay, proteins, macromolecules that contain nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And these are large polymer molecules, but they're monomers. The building block of this is an amino acid. Okay, so you take an amino acid and connect it to another amino acid, connect it to another amino acid, connect it to another amino acid, and these could be hundreds, if not thousands of amino acids long. This is a protein, which is a polymer. Okay. Here is just a drawing of the general structure of what an amino acid looks like. And this is in your textbook, and you're going to be using this for the bead lab that you're going to do tomorrow. Different amino acids have different R groups. So there is no element on the periodic table called R. R just represents this here, this structure here that can vary. So all amino acids are the same here. Do you see they're all the same? What's different between these two amino acids is the structure of the R group. It's a very small difference here, a little oxygen, but it's a difference nonetheless. And that determines the shape in three-dimensional space, the actual physical shape that the protein will have. And this is going to become really, really important when we talk about protein synthesis. So the difference between one amino acid and the next is this side chain, the R group. And the R group is what gives a protein its shape. How does a cell know what protein to make? Well, that is stored, the information that's actually stored in our DNA. And so we talk about this, something called the central dogma of biology. DNA is used to make RNA, and RNA is used to make protein. And proteins give us our traits. So that's the flow of information and the connection between DNA and proteins. Function of proteins? Write that down in your left-hand column. What's the function of proteins? The function of proteins are controlling the rate of reactions and regulating cell processes. That's what we use enzymes for. We make bones and muscles through collagen, actin, and myosin. We use them for transporting substances, hemoglobin in our blood, and to help us fight diseases, antibodies. So the functions, the jobs that proteins do are extremely varied and extremely important. This might be a moment where you want to pause the video so that you can catch up and write down all of those things and write down examples. Make your notes organized so that when you go back and review them later, it'll be easier for you. I'm going to skip this slide we'll skip that. And oh, it's time for our quiz. Yay! I know I'm at 29 minutes right now, so let's go through this quiz really quickly. Large carbohydrate molecules such as starch are known as, pick your answer. Did you get it right? Polysaccharides. Many lipids are formed from glycerol and, pick your answer. Fatty acids. How are you doing? Proteins are among the most diverse, meaning different varieties of macromolecules because they can twist and fold into many different complex structures. And that is controlled, the shape they have is controlled by the order of amino acids. Which of the following statements about cellulose is true? Plants make it and use it to give structural support to cells, the cell wall. And lastly, a major difference between polysaccharides and proteins is that polysaccharides are made up of monosaccharides while proteins are made up of amino acids. So that's the end of our section. I'm sorry it took me so long. It's a lot to do in one day. Homework tonight, you're going to be completing a graphic organizer and reviewing these notes and finishing them up. And tomorrow we'll do a lab. See you later. Bye.